Welcome back to Tita Lab. So this is going to be a part 2 of our last episode with Ariana. And we have so much to talk about. We know that our last one premiered in Filipino American History Month, but this one is appearing in November because we feel like it's really important just for us to talk about these issues year round. So very excited to get more into it because I learned so much from you last time. So
You are
thank
just
you.
a wealth of information, and I love just learning. So thank you again, just to make us aware, and for anyone listening to be aware. So while we are called the Tita Labs, I wanted to highlight this because we talk about very serious issues. We talk about very light issues sometimes, as we are doing today and the previous episode. A lot of this is very serious, but something that I'm learning with this type of work, with these type of discussions, when they can be this heavy and sometimes feel as if it can just be so frustrating. Are we making forward progress? Is how do we take care of ourselves when that happens? Because we cannot make change unless we take care of ourselves. So that's why we tie it into Tita Lasso, which is part of who we are. We laugh, we find laughter, not to make light of anything, but because in those few moments, we can find joy, we understand each other, and it's moments of respite that we need to just have a little bit of rest from it so that we can go back into these wonderful discussions. So with that said, we want to continue this dialogue. And you informed me, Ariana, that Bong Bong is going to be here in California this month, correct?
Yes. Yeah, Bong Bong Marcos, which is his nickname, but he's the president of the Philippines right now. He's elected in May of 2022. He's the son of Ferdinand Marcos, his father, who was a dictator who established martial law in the Philippines and was ousted because of the people power movement and students and religious people and everyday, farmers and workers getting together to really say that we don't want him as our president. So yes, Bong Bong, his son, who's the current president, will be in California. There's something called the APEC Summit. It's the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. It's CEOs or leaders of different nations that are around the Asia Pacific islands, the Asia Pacific waters. So the Philippines, for example, India, as well as the United States, bordering the Pacific Ocean on both sides, will be there to talk about policies that kind of help them. We're really opposed to it as Gabriela. Calling them member economies, it's all about how money moves between them. It's not concerned with anything of human rights. It's not concerned with women's oppression. Their big things that they're trying to promote is we're really good for women. We're going to help women get jobs, and we're really good for the environment. And so we're going to help the environment. But
how do they get away with that? When they
it's not
start
even real.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not
How
real.
is that? How do they
can
make
say
that?
whatever.
They just say it.
Exactly.
Don't actually do it.
Their thing is that they're promoting is that women are the future. We want women to have jobs just like men have jobs. And their big thing is tech. We're going to help a bunch of women be coders. The problem with that is that there's a lot of real issues with that. The issue of most people in the Philippines and most working class people and peasant people in India, for example, is one of land. There's what people are calling for is not to learn coding when their whole family have been farmers for generations and generations. They're calling to own the land so that they can make some of the profits from selling it to the neighbors and to the grocery stores and even abroad if they so choose or need to do, at least right now. And so making a bunch of women coders, we see that as just ultimately it's very profitable for Microsoft and Amazon because they can pay Philippine prices for the same work.
They're just using us again.
Yes, that's what we're seeing it. And so, but they're saying, oh, we're giving women jobs.
We're giving opportunities.
Yeah, we're helping them be technologically competent when most people on the ground are really asking for just land redistribution, fair wages, they still want to do the work that helps their communities, their economy, their own livelihood. Like people need food to live.
Mm-hmm.
We don't, I mean, coding sure is important, but that's not the call that people in all these places facing a lot of brutal repression and issues. The real issue of most of these women and whatever the global South countries are really just looking for land and not like coding or tech jobs. So that's one of the things happening. And we see this summit that's happening. It starts the weekend of November 11th, 12th, and then it goes until November 17th. CEOs, or heads of state will be all together on November 15th in San Francisco. That's where the summit's being held, as technology is their big banner for this year and this summit. It's usually hosted in many different countries. This is the first time in a while it's hosted in the United States and, of all places, in San Francisco, which is in California. So Bongbong Marcos, Modi, I think Biden, Kamala Harris will also be at this summit next in a couple of weeks or whenever, in mid-November. So people are going to kind of express that they're not okay with all these, to talk about the future of these countries as numbers and as profit to be gained, and to not actually talk about solutions when things are so dire in the Philippines and even here for us in the United States.
So what is Gabriela doing about this?
So Gabriela is mobilizing our community and our people to go up there. We're going to do a counter summit that really talks about, well, if they're not going to talk about what's really going on in these countries, what is our perspective of what's really going on in these places? And what's our solution to these issues?
What's the voice of the people? Because the people are on the ground floor. We don't need other people to tell us what to do.
Yeah. We don't need the United States to continue saying, oh, you're not able to govern yourselves. That's why you need to be under our thumb, because we are the real harbingers of like democracy.
Imperialism.
Already. Exactly. And so we're doing a counter summit. The International League of People's Struggles, which links a lot of the anti-imperialist people's movements across the world, is hosting a counter summit in mid-November, the weekend before the summit and at the beginning of the summit. And then there'll be big mobilizations throughout the week to really bring attention to what real people are calling for. That's very different than the call for neoliberal policy or unequal trade relationships. They're trying to increase profits going between all these countries. And what that means for Filipinos is that our exports will be, the US can get them for cheaper prices. And so it'll only further the export-oriented, import-dependent economy we have, where it won't allow for factories to grow because it's just cheaper. You get more money if you export it, but that means that the system will continue for years and generations of no one owning land. We can't make anything within the Philippines because we have no infrastructure to make it. And it'll continue this thing of, it's the only way to make a living is to literally leave, or someone in your family leaves to give you money to even survive. That's what this policy is going to continue.
There's no independence. There's
no independence.
Always dependent on something.
Very dependent on U.S. benevolence or U.S. So we see this as not the real solution to our people's problems. So we're there to amplify what people are saying and the movement to end, the root cause of a lot of the exploitation and the forced family separation that we see. So that's what Gabriela's doing. And it's always been outspoken against people like Bongbong Marcos and the political dynasty families of the Philippines, of Ferdinand Marcos, who was a dictator. We've always been outspoken. And so this is just a continuation of many generations of women and activists and organizers who have wanted to make sure that everyday people, workers and peasants' voices are at the forefront of change and dictating and really commanding the presence. We're 90% of the population. The peasants and the workers together make up an overwhelming majority of the population, like 85 to 90% of the Philippines itself. And so their voices deserve to be the ones making decisions that really affect their lives the most.
So much
I know
to absorb. I want to ask and circle back to Gabriela. What is the objective of the mobilization and hosting that conference? And, besides speaking about and getting dialogue, is there like a tangible, that's hard, not even necessarily tangible,
and also,
but
like if people are watching, like if they want to get involved, how would they get involved?
Totally. Gabriela works alongside many other organizations calling for national democracy. It's a whole movement. FAHM is the campaign center here in the United States and is also based in the Philippines. So if you've ever heard of Anak Bayan, that organizes youth and students. So that's those under 35 years old, roughly, and those going through like school or education. Migrante for migrants. And we also have Gabriela, who organizes women and children and families. All of them have the same goal, which is to further support and educate people on the national democratic line, which is, as in the last episode, we talked about the national democratic perspective of what are the three basic problems. And we analyze and go back in history. It didn't appear overnight.
No,
there's a super long history into going back to how the Philippines was first colonized by Spain in the 1500s. So that's really where the roots of this started.
Yeah.
So it's a long history. There's a lot of context.
Yeah.
So we exist because there is such a need for, we really wanted to call women into the movement. There was such, especially with the height of Catholicism and religious thinking of like women's place is to be at home with the kids, subservient to men, either their husband or their father or the landlord or whoever.
Everyone comes first before herself.
Totally. And Lorena Barros, who is one of the people who founded Gabriela and was really at the forefront of the women's movement during the time of martial law, was credited. She's a poet. She's a writer, a mother, and a revolutionary fighter who had died fighting against martial law, against the administration of Ferdinand Marcos. And she's credited with saying like a woman's place is in the revolution and to really be at the forefront of changing history. And so really, we really want to call women into this, to know history, know self.
I love that. No history, no self.
It's such an important, and sometimes
Can we break that down for people who are just listening too? Because if you don't know.
That's a big one. You can take a stab
at
it. How do you understand no history, no self?
I remember Professor Bogos at SF State, one of the pioneers for the ethnic studies, Filipino studies at SF State. I remember seeing him write this on the board. No history, no self, spelled with N-O, history, N-O, no self, comma, on the next line, K-N-O-W, no history, and then K-N-O-W, no self. Are there other interpretations?
No, that's 100% what I was thinking.
That's so powerful. That like stuck with me that first. Yeah. I just audited one class. I was like, I still, other than many things in college, I was like, that stuck with me, and that wasn't even my university. Yeah. It's really, have you heard that quote before?
I don't know if I have. I feel like I have, but I don't know who I would attribute it to.
Yeah, I think some professor, I think it went around in like the leftist spaces in college or something. I think it's really important. We also acknowledge, as Filipino, in Gabriela, USA, a lot of us many people may be born in the Philippines, but a lot of us, especially here right now in Los Angeles, we're not born in the Philippines or are very rooted in being in the United States. And Filipino American is an identity that we hold. And no history, no self really calls to mind how connected we are with the Philippines. Even if we don't acknowledge it or don't know a lot, we really want to call people into the movement. That's really what we exist to do, is to call people, particularly those who never even saw a place, maybe even never imagined a place for them in organizing or in community life, in politics or engaging with politics, engaging with like even philosophical thought and action. And we're also proud to be like a fighting organization. Many protests happening around LA, international, like there are a lot of things that Gabriela is at to really call for more Filipino women and children and families to be part of the movement, and also to draw this connection between us here as Filipino Americans rooted in the United States and what's going on in the Philippines. If we really want justice in the Philippines, our tax dollars go to fund, the military in the Philippines that is used against our people. We saw with Duterte when he was president, the drug war, there was a lot of collaboration. There was a lot of money that went. That is like, we fund that in many ways.
I think a lot of people don't realize that is a direct tie. that's why we need to be concerned. Because I think it's that, again, that distant people are like, oh, we've escaped that. It has nothing to do with me mentality. I'm like, no, our tax dollars are going to that. And that's just such a chilling thought.
We're all part of it. And we didn't choose, in many ways to be part of it, to have our tax dollars go. But it's so, I see it as very rooted to myself to care about the Philippines. And I mean, the questions in college that led me from a very conservative background to where I'm at now was people were asking me like, oh, I was exposed to all these people of different cultures and they seem to know a lot about their families and their culture. And I felt so distant from mine. I wanted to forge my own identity. I thought, I don't have to be part of the Filipino club. Like I can be my own person. Like that's who I was, but that's not who I am now. Like I want to figure out who that is. And I started to feel really homesick for these parts of being Filipino American that I missed. And I also realized I didn't really know what it meant for me. I knew what my family, what it meant for my dad or my mom, or what they maybe wanted it for us. But I didn't feel like I really made a conscious choice as like a burgeoning adult, 18, to really understand what it meant for me. And also realizing I could choose whenever I wanted, really, at that time. And so this wanting to know myself caused me to learn more about my history and caused me to find that connection. And I wouldn't have gotten there if it wasn't for a community that was also diverse, that also it prompted me to ask those questions. And also if I wasn't curious about who I really was, and asking those questions often can lead you down this path that I think many people can relate to, of finding that out.
All on our journeys of like self-discovery and especially this unique identity of being Filipino American. And then I love that you're taking this step further of realizing, and I'm realizing too by talking to you, of how strong of that tie to the homeland it is, how it pertains to us here, even though it is an ocean away, even though we practice culture and the fun stuff of it. The politics, again, returning to politics is so vital, again, whether we realize it or not. I would love to circle back onto, I think, a topic that might be, challenging for many with Marcos, with, I know personally for me, with my family, who is on one side supporting him and, the senior, I'm talking about senior, and going through martial law and having that tension of just even having a conversation of understanding. I don't understand how you can support a dictator like that. And while I've studied here in the US and, written papers and all of that, studied it extensively in college, a lot of my focus at UC San Diego for my history courses was just attacking this and really trying to understand, starting from Spanish all the way to modern day, ending with people power and Marcos. I know both of you have even your stories of like how that's affected you, trying to wrap our mind about Marcos Sr. and even Marcos today, Bongbong, of how do we even start, right? Yeah.
How he was elected, or how Imelda was elected, after, essentially being a dictator, starving people while they were living it up.
Well, she gained 1 million shoes or whatever it was. That's the adage. It's like 1,000 shoes. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Don't you hate that that's like the running thing of like people across the world?
That's what they know about the Philippines.
That's what they know about the Philippines. Imelda Marcos with shoes.
Yes.
Shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's terrible that that's a reputation.
Yeah.
I hate that. I asked myself that question a lot, especially when it was becoming very clear that Bongbong was going to win in early.
And then the VP is
and then
Duterte.
Yes. Sara Duterte is the vice president, who is the daughter of Duterte, who was the last president of the Philippines before Bongbong was. It's complicated, and it's also not. When we think about a lot of these, it's like, isn't it all like kind of, we look at it and we analyze it and we take all this feedback and like, oh, it's capitalism, corruption.
Yeah.
Like
the same story.
U.S. imperialism at the heart of a lot of it. How I try to understand it. And I'm lucky where I asked my grandma like in the election, because she can vote, but she doesn't choose to vote. She also feels a very big separation, despite living and having a child and getting married, in the Philippines. She did not want Marcos to be president. She was like, oh, he did terrible things. But we talked to a lot of people, even at church, and a lot of Filipinos are at church too, and we asked them who maybe even lived through it, and they remember maybe a skewed history. We attribute a lot of the rise of power for the Marcoses in two things. One is there's a history of political dynasties where if you're in the right family and you have the right connections, that's enough to get you any elected position, and money with any, even with the background that Bongbong has of his father robbing the Filipino people and
being exiled.
Exiled, right?
Yes,
How do people not
crimes
remember
against
that?
the people. And back in, like, people were alive during that. Like, our families were alive. It's not like this, like, 1850 where it's like generations on generations. Like, there are photos, there's videos. That's documented.
But they don't acknowledge that they've done anything wrong.
That's the thing. My parents don't acknowledge that.
Well, they
anything's wrong.
themselves, the
Americans
Oh, them. Yeah, that too.
acknowledge
And the
That too.
people.
And the
anything
people.
they've done.
No
is
one.
wrong.
We think historical revisionism, or basically the rewriting of history, was really a huge part of it, in addition to political dynasties, as to why Marcos Jr., Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the second, was elected to be the president of the Philippines just last year. There's a lot of people who think, oh, well, his dad built a bunch of roads. It helped with unemployment. And then we highlight the tortures, the killings, EJKs, or extrajudicial killings, just killing people on the street. The disappearances. A lot of people disappeared and maybe weren't surfaced, that we're not sure what happened, or a lot children were attacked. Children died. Liliosa Hilao is one such martyr from the movement that we talk about often, who was a student who was targeted. And there's women, there's journalists, there's priests, there were a lot of different people who were really targeted. And so we see it as a clear violation of human martial law. The military control of the island is a scary thought, not a comforting thought. So people don't, that family and that family's background and the money that they have are just able to control things like the mainstream media of the Philippines, decision makers. They still had people who were allied with them in Congress and in politics, even if they weren't even on the islands themselves. So they were able to work together to create this and to forward. I think a documentary came out last year or earlier this year that was through the perspective, I forget the name of it, I'll have to look it up, but it was through the perspective of people who worked for the Marcos family during martial law. And they were like, oh, he was great. He treated us wonderfully, Of course they would treat you wonderfully as people who serve the family. And they had basically funded a documentary, movies to be made, highlighting how great their family treated other people as a way to erase the real history of what happened during martial law, of people dying. Like, that is what's really a part of this human rights violations. And some people just simply, if you only watch media, if you only hear what your family have told you, and maybe they were one of the ones treated well because they owned land and he wanted those people to be happy. So
that's true. My parents, my lineage did own land.
They
did.
If they
weren't rich, but they owned land. Yeah.
If you own land, you often had a pretty good experience during martial law. And those people often come to the US on their own free will because maybe they weren't forced out, maybe in the same way, depending.
Yeah.
And they're the ones who talk about, oh, I was treated great. Like, the Philippines was great, they
needed order. We needed order here. And they put control.
Yeah.
And allowed there to be order.
Justified. Yeah. It cleaned up the streets.
Yeah.
Got rid of drug dealers.
The narrative I would hear.
It's so interesting that they can't put themselves in other people's shoes. Like, even though I didn't experience this, other people did, and it's not right.
Totally.
Empathy.
It's hard.
Why can't people have empathy? I think
or just because
generation.
it didn't happen to me, it doesn't happen to anyone.
Exactly. It's hard. I find media literacy also is part of this. I'm very passionate about it, and I feel like experiencing how COVID misinformation hit us in the United States, thinking about 5 decades before in the Philippines, how much harder that was. No Facebook, whatever, but everything word of mouth, not sure what to trust in news. I empathize, with people who, and I can see how they came to conclusions of these things, but I also want the mission of Gabriela, the mission of a lot of these organizations is just to spread the truth just to spread history.
That's huge.
Because these are real things documented and immortalized. Like we got names, we got photos. This isn't like made up history.
Yeah.
We want to show that it really did happen. And it really was as bad, if not worse, than how people saw it, or if they've never heard it, like to really introduce this just so that they know the truth too. You know, we consider ourselves on, I see myself on the right side of history, because our mission really is one of exposing like the true nature of things, not sugarcoating, not trying to make it better than it is, but really show what it is.
You're really trying to make it better for everyone, not just a select group of people.
Yes,
who support you.
Exactly.
You know, that's the people who support me. I want to just cater to them.
You said the quiet part out loud. That's I think a lot of people, I think many people that I've met, even if I don't agree with them, like the thing we have in common is we want what's right for the Philippines. They have maybe a skewed version of what that's supposed to be or what they see that as being. But at the root, we all really care about the Philippines being a good place to live, to raise a family, to have a living, to be fulfilled, you know, not just make money, but like have a community.
Yeah.
That's really important to even people I disagree with.
Yeah.
You know? And that's important here in the US, as my parents are big Trump supporters, you know, like
So are mine.
So are mine.
yeah.
It's so funny how
Wow.
our generation is just so opposite of that, because I was very much raised in like a Republican conservative household, very much like you were. And then kind of when I got to college, I was like, wait a second, like none of this, I don't agree with any of it. I think I registered as a Republican when I turned 18 because that's all I knew.
Yeah.
And when I met my husband, I told him I was Republican. He was like, like, yeah, because he was very liberal. His mom was very progressive. And yeah, but it's just, I love that we can have that free thought separate from our parents. And even though like that is how they think, like, I can't agree with essentially anything you guys believe in.
Yeah. What I find really interesting about that is, I don't know if you've heard, but it's ATB, it's now ATL. It's called the anti-terror bill or anti-terror law. It came up in the Philippines during COVID. I think it was 2020 to 2021. Someone had said that like, we're against terrorism. This is, I think, Duterte's time. So we're against terrorism. We're trying to clean up the streets. This is the middle of, or nearing some part of the drug war that Duterte was waging. Drug war in quotes, of course, because really we saw it as a war on the poor and the war of like people who are at the bottom rung of
That's
society.
so much more accurate.
Yeah. War on the
exactly
poor.
it.
And we can hear that same thing about US and other places that also
absolutely.
have a similar, like, you know, it's drugs killing
The war on
people.
drugs or whatever.
Exactly.
Was targeting
Yeah.
poor brown
People.
and black communities. Yeah.
And brown and black people specifically in the US and how that was expressed. The ATL or the anti-terror bill was to criminalize speech that action, but really speech that they thought would forward terrorism. How it was interpreted is that even things like a Facebook post that were critical of the government, which again at the time, the war on drugs, which we understood as the war on the poor, in the Philippines, saying something like, I don't agree with how Duterte is handling this. I think innocent people are being killed on the streets, which was true. That could be considered terrorist speech, and people were being like jailed or investigated because of that. And we see, if you're criminalizing speaking out or just saying you disagree
Freedom
with the
of
government,
speech. Yeah.
we're seeing this as a huge violation. So our parents grew up, even if that wasn't the law of the land in our parents' time, especially if they lived or were in the Philippines during martial law, that was kind of the attitude of the time. Anything critical of the government is just seen as terrorism, not even just like not good for democracy. It was straight up terrorism. Another fear.
Yeah.
It's
still that
so
fear
much
to the
fear.
same.
One story that also sticks with me that I tell a lot of people of how much they want to call anyone who disagrees with them terrorists is that during COVID, probably 2020, around the same time, there was a college student who wanted to open a food bank. She saw that there was a lot of people who weren't able to have their same, they couldn't be caretakers because COVID was raging and they needed to take a break, and there was no vaccine yet, no access to vaccines, or it wasn't created. So it was really early on. And so it was very dangerous. So a lot of people stayed at home, but that meant no work, meant no money. So she had created like a food bank and a food pantry for people like her neighbors, and people started to contribute. And it was this beautiful movement of, yes, everything is so messed up, but these people were finding a way to instill community in a very difficult time. They called the food bank terrorist activity, which is just so heartbreaking to think about. That's they trying to instill a sense of fear that even your neighbor who's trying to be like
To do
share what they
good.
have to do good is the enemy, and that the only one you should really trust is those in power, the government. Which is, it was so heartbreaking. And she was like, I'm really just trying to start, like, I just saw that people were hungry and I wanted to start it. But they know that instilling fear is their strongest weapon, is the cultural. It doesn't even have to be codified into law. It was, but also even just that social pressure of, well, they're not who they say they are. They're really this, and they want this, and trying to tell you that they want violence, when really what people were doing was just trying to provide for each other and be a community when the government wasn't providing aid in the time of COVID, when many people couldn't report to work because of how dangerous it was before the vaccine came out. So we see every single effort to delegitimize people who are just trying to say there's something wrong with the heart of what's going on in the Philippines, and trying to make it better. And they want to hold on to power. So they do anything they can to delegitimize that and to make people scared of Gabriela. Gabriela's been called a terrorist organization, has been called many different things to make people scared, when really they're helping people defend their land against foreign interests who are trying to tap oil in Mindanao or the southern part of the Philippines. They're trying to defend the people who were targeted during the war on drugs, or the war on terror, or the war on the poor. They're standing up for human rights, standing up for Maria Ressa when she has been targeted by the Duterte government for daring to be a journalist, speak the truth during the height of the war on drugs.
And the extrajudicial killings as well, which is insane.
Yeah.
That so many people accepted that.
Yeah, as we heard a narrative of, if we don't stop this war on drugs now, it's going to terrorize the entire city. It's going to be like many more people will die. So we have to kill people now without trial, without any due process, without cause to somehow curtail a drug epidemic that would be. And we think, how do people turn to drugs or fall to addiction? And it really is a political reason. It's poverty.
And
it's
I
poverty.
think people
and
forget that.
Powerlessness.
It's such fear and manipulation are such evil tools that
for mental health as well, especially if you don't take into context or have programs for people who are suffering. And then
I even know family members who don't believe maybe bipolar disorder is real, depression is real. And when it comes into these, we see how that can be so damaging because they attribute the wrong problem or the wrong source. You just have to, if something were to happen, someone were to be depressed, something like a mental health issue, it's like, oh, just pray to God.
Oh, gosh.
God will solve anything, like, and it's like, as a religious person, they know you can try.
You
can do that.
And we can say this as, we're very spiritual.
I'm Catholic. Yeah, I go to church.
I go to church. That's how we met. But you can still be Catholic and still acknowledge, no, there is science. There is information out there that we need to be privy to make informed decisions.
Totally.
So, again, don't want to end on this sad, depressing, and frustration note.
And on a hopeful note.
And I as Stacey knows, that I always try to do that. I think that's what Gabriela is able to do, despite all of these problems and social issues that is at hand. There's a beacon of light that the work Gabriela does,
and that you're doing,
and how can people? What are the specific steps that people can do to get involved with Gabriela, or even just to be part of this movement?
So if people want to join, that is really the step number one.
Is it like a website that they go to?
Oh, yeah.
Or
Gabriela.
What is it?
It's GabrielaLA.org. And you can also follow us on Instagram, Gabriela Los Angeles, at Gabriela Los Angeles. And we post about different mobilizations we're going. There's actually folks right now at a Palestinian movement protest put on by Palestinian Youth Movement that some of my kasamas are at, which is very exciting.
Shout out.
Shout out.
Yeah.
They're there. And so we're very entrenched in like the local and connecting it to the international Philippine movement in all the work that we do to raise that perspective and to make this whole place really curious about this and fight for justice in the Philippines. There's many different events people can go to. One of my favorite, if you ever see it offered, I highly encourage, and I will send it, is PSR. It's Philippine Society and Revolution. It's based on a book, and it's a workshop that is, the main question of it is, why is the land of the Philippines so rich in resources like gold and silver, oil, fish? Lands are fertile for all these produce. But if that is true, why are the people so poor?
Yes.
Why is there so much poverty?
Question.
And it's a 6 to 8 hour workshop
Spread
out over a couple sessions, like an afternoon and the next week, the next afternoon or something like that explores the history from pre-colonial, before Spain came to the moment Spain came to the Philippines, into American colonization, Japanese colonization, American again, freedom, technically, but how free are we? Independence, I should say. And then into what we see as the problem and solutions. So that's a workshop we offer a couple of times a year. And it helped me understand so much, the no history, no self, to understand that I was connected, not even just to this current moment and this current movement, but all of this history I carry with me. And all of us carry with us as Filipino women into who we are. And how vital it was for me to understand myself through that context and through that lens. So there's workshops we offer called labor export policy. Why are there so many OFWs, overseas Filipino workers? Why are people basically shipped off to live other places as nannies and caregivers and workers? Forced to leave their family to take care of other families while their kids have to grow up by themselves or in a different communal environment. Yeah. That really answers that question. And how policy really shaped so much of that, specifically in the martial law era, but not just that, but also like before then, it was so common and then became rapidly way more common. Things like neoliberalism, what is capitalism? We're a group that has a socialist perspective. So what does that mean for the Philippines? What's our image and our vision for a really democratic national democratic Philippines? And so all these things, attending workshops, reading, learning.
I have one more question about for people who don't live in like urban areas who are in areas where there might not be like a Gabriela or any of these spaces where there's not a big Filipino community, how would you suggest they get involved, or maybe opening up a chapter? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. If you have more 10 or more people, you can start a Gabriela chapter. Reach out to me. Reach out to Gabriela LA, and then we can figure out a way for that to happen. Like, because we know people who are in like allied movements. There's something called PUSO, which is Philippine U.S. Solidarity Organization. Basically, if you're not Filipino, but you want to support the fight for justice in the Philippines, then that's an organization that specifically is like a solidarity organization, coming from that perspective of we're in the United States and we're implicated because we pay taxes for this war that's going on. So how can we leverage that and bring people who are not Filipino into the movement? Because anyone can be part of this movement. It's really is very, very broad, especially in the US where we know tax dollars go to this. So that's one thing. I would reach out to us. We can connect you in Gabriela LA and other organizations, I'm sure, depending in different areas, about people that might be in your area that are looking also, because we hear that too. We're like, oh, I'm part of Gabriela, but I'm moving to Atlanta because I have work there or going to school. And so we always have
Nebraska. We're in
Nebraska. One or two Arkansas,
yeah, exactly.
Like moving to Canada even. Like we have people, there's Gabriela chapters in Canada. There's places in London and UK and all over. So even if you go somewhere abroad, there's Gabriela chapters and other people in the National Democratic Movement, really everywhere. Anywhere that there's some concentration of Filipinos, even if it's a little bit, we can reach those people.
Wonderful.
So reaching out to us so we can connect you to like people, but I would really look for a National Democratic. So Anakbayan, Gabriela, Migrante, are these places that have these huge networks.
Education really is so important. Being informed.
Yeah.
Finding a collective, I think, is the next step. Like finding like-minded people so you have that support can agree upon a plan, execute, but also just to be in solidarity with each other.
Yeah. Even people, it's just so great to vent sometimes to people who get it.
Yes.
You know, to like have a space where you can really just like, I'm so frustrated with the way that the US is responding to this issue, or how the Philippines, this is happening. And people to really be in the struggle with you in your darkest moments, in the parts you're really unsure, even being honest, but like, I don't know how to feel about this. Like, I was raised in this way, but I'm hearing this. People that you can trust, like, have kind of a similar analysis to support and challenge each other. We help each other push on those kinds of things.
You want to be like-minded, but you also want to challenge each other.
Absolutely.
Which I think a lot of people don't do, which is how we end up with so many of these issues.
We totally acknowledge that these kinds of conversations are very difficult and they can be very scary. I mean, I'm not someone who am like, I love conflict. That's never been me. With the military family, it was just, it's very scary, you know, to have to disagree even. But I found so much of my personal growth as a person, like totally, we can remove politics from that entirely. Being able to stand up for myself and be able to know what it is I really want, and being allowed to say no and to push back on something when there's something like, I'm not sure I agree with that, was so helpful and healing for me. And to do it in the context of like politics is just another layer of that, to really know who I am and what it is I believe. It's so core for me to know what I believe.
And finding that voice once you do that, to be able to have the courage to speak your mind, have that voice be heard, is so vital. Again, all that starts with, we have to be informed. We have to continue to curious. We have to be curious. We have to challenge ourselves, hear the other side too, and listen. I think that's
totally.
Well, I think we were all raised in the other side, and then came to the conclusions that we came to, which is on education or educating ourselves, or just like, no, I just don't feel like this is right.
Which is a lot of growth. I applaud us.
I think that's
going through that.
I think that's the hope that we can realize, is that we are products of change, and we're continuing that movement, that it is possible. You know, all of us, we are like, look at where we came from and our parents, and they're still there, you know, and look what we're doing right now. We're not done. You know, we still have so much more to go, but it's possible.
To be an organizer, I learned, is to be like radically, to have revolutionary hope, I think they call it. It can be so hard to be presented with the facts of war, you know, to have hope for change. But we know in our history, even in American history, there was a whole revolution over taxation. Like, why can't there be change of society due to this human rights violations going on? Like, I really do believe, and through working with others and in a collective, that change is possible. That we can even live to see a completely different Philippines than the one we see now at our age of being young adults. There is still a lot of time and a lot of people who every day are finding this movement for real justice and real democracy, and finding inspiration and actually joining it and forwarding, even thousands of miles away, radical root changes to the society of the Philippines. So I feel very inspired from people who join this and are even curious and are starting to ask questions, because I see only good things coming out of people being curious and having an open mind and learning from each other and starting conversations that might be difficult, that probably will be difficult, but really help to understand who we are. And I think there is so much still that is yet to come, that is really going to inspire us and to really take action. And I think, I really feel like in our lifetimes, we'll see some really good change in the Philippines if we keep at this and we stay in this community.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
Of course. I was so happy to talk about this with y'all.
And you'll definitely be on again.
There's so much more to talk.
So much more to
tell. Yes.
We'll get questions next time. I'm so excited for that. Thank you for having me on. This is really fun.